All right, folks, today we have a very exciting podcast for you. We're going to do a deep dive into some nefarious happenings behind the scenes that most of you are probably not aware of that's taking place in the West from certain entities that we're going to uncover here today. The gentleman that I have here that's going to be taking us into this interesting deep dive, and it's going to be an eye opening podcast, guys. Trust you, me. Chuck Holton, he's a good friend. We have gotten to connect here through the war corresponding that he's been doing here in Israel. He's been covering wars internationally all over the war, conflicts in some of the hottest zones that you can imagine. So he is also battle hardened as a military war veteran himself. So he has that under his belt. In addition to, again, just after his military service, being a war correspondent and just covering conflicts all over the world and giving you the eyewitness account, boots on the ground of what is happening in the different conflicts around the world, and also including Israel. So, Chuck Holton, today we'll be talking about some of the nefarious work that China, Russia, possibly other countries. I'm guessing the marriage between the red green. So we have also Islamic um, entities probably funding a lot of this nefarious work to break down Western society. Can you give the audience here a little bit of an insight of what's been going on that they're not aware of, how they've been attacked without firing a rocket, without firing a bullet, right? And that's been going on right now, or for many years, really. But yeah.
Sure. I mean, of course, there's always been this sort of axis between East and West, at least since the end of World War II. And you have the Eastern countries, China, Russia, Iran, etc., who are countering what they see as an overbearing Western influence on the world. The reason that there's an overbearing Western influence on the world is because the West has generally better ideas and better technology. It's you're talking about first world uh, offerings, the things that the West has to offer, as opposed to second or third world offerings that are on offer from the radical Islamic countries and North Korea and China and Russia. Now, Russia is without a doubt less of an actual country and more of a kleptocracy that masquerades as a country. They're a giant mafia organization that is run straight from the top from Vladimir Putin. And this is not hyperbole. This is not hearsay. This is all stuff that has been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. There are tons of good literature out there about it. If you want just one to start with, go read Bill Browder's book called Red Notice, which explains how the Russian government works under Vladimir Putin and how they have essentially just robbed the resources of the Russian state to make themselves. Everybody thinks Elon Musk is the richest guy on planet Earth. He's not by a long shot. Vladimir Putin, without a doubt, is the richest man on planet Earth, probably more than $1 trillion that he has control of, to say nothing of the resources of the.
So Vladimir Putin, but not someone above him.
Oh no, he's the top guy, and all of the oligarchs in virtually every billionaire in Russia, and there are quite a few, is tied directly to Vladimir Putin. And the way that it works is Vladimir Putin says, "Look, I will give you, Sergei, control over these oil fields or these natural gas refineries or this industry, whatever." And you can live large, spend as much, you'll have more money than you could ever possibly spend, but just understand that every penny of that belongs to me. And if I call it in, then it's mine. And so that's how he has surrounded himself with sycophants who will uh, not go against anything he said. And whenever they do, of course, then those guys happen to commit suicide with 3 shots to the back of their head, or fall out an 8th-story window in short order. As you saw with Prigozhin. Prigozhin was a cook who became a billionaire. We don't meet a lot of cooks who become billionaires. But the minute that he started to criticize Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine, gosh, his private jet just fell out of the sky. It was real unfortunate, accident that happened there.
Yeah, it
But
happens. It happens. He
right,
hired the wrong crew to maintenance the plane, right?
that's right. It definitely happens if you're in Russia. And
Oh
if you
my
read
gosh.
that book, Red Notice by Bill Browder, he was a money manager from the UK who went to Moscow after the fall of the Soviet Union, started buying up Russian stocks because people didn't even know what stocks were back then, and they had received shares of the companies that they worked for, and they had no idea. They'd never done anything like that before, so they were selling them for pennies on the dollar. He went over there and bought up a whole bunch of those things and made billions of dollars for his clients, his investors. And when he got very big, he had more than $4 billion. Then one day, somebody from the Russian government went into the records and changed the name of the owner of his company to some crony of Vladimir Putin. And they waited until he was out of the country to do it. He tries to come back to the country, and they're like, "Oh, your visa's been canceled, and oh, by the way, you don't own that company anymore." And
Man.
they tried to steal. He fortunately last second was able to get his $4 billion out of Russia, but they took that company and filed the last 7 years of taxes for that company and made up $270 million of additional write-offs, and then got that $270 million from the Russian government and disappeared with it. And so that's
Wow.
how it works in
That's
Russia. It is
crazy.
a giant criminal state. Now, the Russians, and again, these countries all work together: Russia, North Korea, Iran, and China. The Russians are very aggressive in multiple theaters of conflict, and not just in the kinetic battle space like they are in Ukraine, Moldova, South Ossetia, Abkhazia, in Chechnya, et cetera, et cetera. But they are actively engaged in warfare with the West in Europe. And I would submit to you that there's an increasing body of evidence that they're actually committing acts of war in the United States as we speak. So I need to break that down. And
Yeah. Yeah.
we'll start with Europe. There have been many, we're talking about dozens and dozens of incidents in the last 3 years across Europe where a plane has suddenly blown up or caught fire. A lot of them are fires, because fires are very, very easy to set, very hard to prove, any intent
Are you
as to,
talking about the
how.
latest plane crashes that kind of happen in such quick succession?
No, I'm not. The ones in the United States, not necessarily. I don't
Okay.
think so. I think those were just, accidents. But
Okay.
uh, now, or maybe most of them were. There
Right.
was one or two that I looked at and went, I don't know. But we
Right.
saw
Like the
in
Hudson one with the Black Hawk seemed a little odd,
yeah,
to say the
actually,
least.
well, I mean, I've been there. That's a super super busy area, so I don't know. But
Right.
nevertheless,
So that could be
there
a
was
legit
a
accident. Yeah.
there was an airplane in Latvia that caught fire. Turned out there was a package that had been put on that aircraft by an FSB agent
Okay.
it was an incendiary package. There have been everything from major power outages to lots of arson. Just in the last week or so, we saw a shopping mall in Warsaw, Poland that burned to the ground, and they were able to trace it back to FSB agents that started it. There was a IKEA, a big warehouse store in Vilnius in Lithuania,
Hmm.
that also burned down. They were able to trace that back to the FSB. They arrested Ukrainian guy in Poland who had taken money from the FSB to start fires all across Poland, and he had planned, he had maps and everything where he was going to start fires. These kinds of fire now that all these fires that are all of a sudden happening in Europe got me wondering, like, man, we've seen a lot of fires in the United States lately, and not just wildfires. Although if I only looked into the wildfires, only did some research on those, but there have been industrial fires and factory fires and other things like that that have got just farms and agricultural stuff. But
Hmm.
if you just look at the wildfires since the 1st of January, there have been more than 10,000 wildfires in the United States alone. That is well above the normal average. And I was only able to find one of them uh, in the research I did today, that they were able to for sure say that it was started by an accident. The rest of them
Wow.
are either known to be arson or inconclusive, and they're still investigating. And
So this is
so
over
it's
10,000 wildfires in the
just in the
US.
United States since January 1st. There
That's
were
insane.
yeah, it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot. And that's, like I say, it's well above, probably at least half again more than the normal average for this time of year. And the other weird thing is that we're seeing these wildfires in places that you've never seen wildfires before. Places like
Mm,
South Carolina, places like Massachusetts, Georgia, places like that. Normally, we see wildfires across the United States in the on the western part of the country, in the very dry areas, Arizona, New Mexico, Southern California, places like that, and Nevada. But now we're seeing them on the East Coast. And
mhm.
this is very, very strange. And again, the ones that they've seen on the East Coast, they've not been able to nail down. I have a friend that I just met in Israel, actually, on this last trip when you and I were together, who is one of the foremost fire investigators in the United States. And he just recently retired, and he's coming to Israel to help the Israelis learn to protect themselves better from all sorts of emergency stuff. But I reached out to him, and he said, "Yeah, there's something really weird going on with all this stuff."
Hmm.
And he sent me a bunch of articles about, uh, you know, people that they have caught lighting fires, and they're not your typical, like, angry, disgruntled, postal employee or something like that.
Mhm.
But they're trying to figure out whether or not these people are actually being used as patsies by Russia. Now, all of that is speculation here in the United States for now, as far
Mhm.
as the direct connection with Russian involvement. But what we do know for sure is that Russia has been full court press against the United States in the information battle space, and in the signals intelligence battle space, and in the cultural espionage battle space.
Mhm.
Okay, and these are very important because these are the
How do
things
they
that
do that?
shape public perception. Well,
Yeah.
they do it through their hackers, hackers and cybercrime. There's another great book I just finished reading a couple weeks ago that's called "This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends." And it's a deep, deep dive into what Russia is doing in terms of hacking and cybercrime against the rest of the world. And this is going to blow your mind. I mean, this almost just knocked my socks off when I read this. The amount of cybercrime that took place across the globe last year,
Mm.
and the vast majority of it, 90+% of all of it, is attributable directly to Russia, China, and to some small extent North Korea or Iran. But
Hmm.
Russia and China are the two big players. But the sum total of cybercrime, people of money that people lost due to hackers and cyber criminals last year around the world, is $9.5 trillion. I had no
Whoa.
idea it was that huge. Nine and
Whoa.
a half trillion dollars is enough money to wipe out world hunger for 30 years. Okay.
Wow.
I mean,
Wow.
that's insane. That's enough money to give every person on planet Earth clean drinking water for the next 1,500 years. And that's the amount of money that's being stolen and scammed out of people. Now we just saw there was um, raid on a compound just across the border from Thailand inside Burma or Myanmar the other day. There was a huge compound with thousands of people that were being held there against their will, made to work as slaves and it was a scam factory. They just had rows and rows and rows of computers where people are scamming people across the globe for all sorts of all in every different way you can imagine.
Hmm.
You and I get those things on social media from some good looking girl with a lot of cleavage going, "Oh, hey, how are you today?" And I'm like, "Oh, honey, if you're interested in a guy like me, you got to be ISIS, because there's no other
Right.
way that a girl that
Right.
looks like that would be interested in me."
The
But
guys in my unit are constantly making fun of that. Like we'll do a screenshot and share it in our group text,
yeah,
laughing about
ISIS,
it, just like you did.
those
It's
real
like,
good looking ISIS girls, yeah.
yeah.
But a vast majority of those are coming out of Myanmar, and they are being run by the Chinese, but to maintain some plausible deniability, they're doing it in Myanmar. And
Hmm.
when I was in Burma last year, I was being strafed and bombed by Russian pilots in MiGs. Probably one of the only
Whoa.
Americans alive today who has been strafed by a Russian MiG. But the Russians are actively assisting the Burmese government, which is complicit in this kind of crime. So
Hmm.
they have dramatically just put so much effort into shaping public opinion, especially about the war in Ukraine. Not just that, but and they've been very successful at that. By the way, that's and one of the things that this journalist who wrote the book that I just mentioned had said is that the Russians hackers that she interviewed, who admitted to doing this, said, the crazy thing is, it's so easy to get Americans at each other's throats. It's so easy. They want to kill each other already. There are two countries living in America that are mutually exclusive. They can't exist in the same space, and yet they have to. And so all we have to do, it just takes a little spark into that environment, and you'll get people just screaming at each other. And you and I have talked about
Yeah.
this when I was
Yeah. Yeah.
there, with that
How
we,
they're using the race wars, they're using the religious wars,
yep,
seculars, religious,
left versus right,
left,
you name
right.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
America's
You're being
become so
programmed.
tribal. Yeah,
Yeah.
and a lot of that programming is coming intentionally from China and Russia, and people just don't believe it. They don't want to believe it, but
Hmm.
without a doubt, it's happening. And
Yeah.
again, there's so much proof of this. I've personally interviewed hackers who explained to me how Russian hackers were able to affect the U.S. elections
Hmm.
back in 2016 and 2020 and 2024. They have worked very hard uh, in those elections, not just on behalf of one candidate or the other, because they really don't care who is the president. All they want to do is get us hating each other more. And so they
Exactly.
actually work on behalf of both candidates just to make it more rancorous inside
More
America. Now,
divisive. As much
right,
as they can divide us, right? That
that's
it's
right.
divide and conquer, right?
Yeah, and you see the same in Israel, right? I mean, between the
Correct.
left and the right. Uh,
Correct. We've
you know,
seen the
you
exact same thing. And if I try to talk about it, people here, they cannot conceive that
mhm,
they're being played from the
yep,
outside.
yep.
And anytime I bring it up, it's like I sound like one of those guys that wears the tin
Tinfoil
hat.
hat.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I'm like, never mind. Like we won't talk about it.
yeah, no,
But
but look, there is
that's what I've
so much
witnessed. And so
evidence.
you've seen the same thing as well, right? That they're
Yeah,
doing that here as well.
yeah, no, they really are. And Russia has been working very hard to make sure that the war in Israel does not get over. They've been
Hmm.
not only supporting Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis. Now you saw Lavrov just today sent a strongly worded message to the U.S. Secretary of State and said, "You had better stop those attacks against the Houthis." The Russians are commanding the United States to stop
Whoa.
our attacks against the Houthis. Like,
Whoa.
okay, so that tells you exactly where they stand. And the reason that they do that is not because they hate Israel or anything as so much as it is that they need as much chaos happening across the globe to distract and dilute America's attention from the war in Ukraine, because that is
Right.
their main objective. And so the more
Yeah.
they're doing it in the Western Hemisphere by encouraging Venezuela to attack Guyana, its neighbor, and claim a third of their entire country as and just annex it, just like Russia has done to Ukraine.
Hmm.
And they're doing that because they know that it will distract America from everything else that's going on in the world, and that is their divide and conquer strategy.
Hmm.
So it is without a doubt. It's not just, uh, you know, Russia and China. China is trying very hard to keep its hands clean, and that's
Hmm.
why it does things through its proxies in North Korea, in Burma, and elsewhere. But they certainly are looking to take advantage of this. Now, they're not any great friend of Russia, and they're gladly taking advantage of Russia's economic woes by
Hmm.
offering to buy Russia's oil and natural gas from them at pennies on the dollar, about a 30% discount over the current going price of oil, which Russia loses money selling oil to China, but they have to do it to get the cash flow. Um,
Wow.
uh, so
So so
they're
so
all
we can
working
put it
together.
so we can put it like this: you have United States, you have Russia, you have China. These are the three superpowers in the world, and essentially it's Russia and China who are teaming up uh, with the other communist nations slash Islamic nations in
Mhm.
order to destroy America, because the common enemy here is the United States and its small brother, so to speak, Israel. Is that a good
Of course.
assessment?
It is. And the reason is because they want to rewrite the rules of global order. For the last 70 years, the United States Navy has guaranteed freedom of navigation. Think about it. You
Mm.
can't drive a ship through the Gulf of Aden or the Red Sea right now because of the threat from a bunch of camel herders out there with rockets that are throwing rockets at anything that moves offshore.
Yeah.
And so they've been able to shut down about 40% of global commerce, which normally would go through the Suez Canal and now does not, for more than a year.
Hmm.
And this is a thing like we could do to Yemen what you all have done to Gaza, but for Yemen that would be an improvement for them. Uh, you know, because
Wow.
that place is a giant dirt parking lot. There's nothing to blow up. I mean, there's plenty to blow up, but uh,
Yeah.
the Houthis look. So
They don't have
my
much to lose, basically.
That's right. They got nothing to lose and everything
Yeah.
to gain from becoming the cool kids on the block by getting to throw missiles around. Even if
Mhm.
they're a complete goat rodeo down there, without a doubt, those guys. I mean, they've been firing missiles and rockets and drones at Israel for literally 15 months, and they've managed to kill exactly one Israeli, which
Yeah.
was a tragedy and should merit uh, all of Yemen turning into a glass parking lot. But the the difficulty is if the United States is pulling back from its role as the guarantor of the freedom of navigation on the seas, then that changes everything in our world.
Hmm.
You think about the fact that you go buy a pair of sneakers right now. You,
Hmm.
you buy a pair of tennis shoes at the mall there in Israel where you live. The that pair of tennis shoes was probably constructed in 4 or 5 different countries. The soles were constructed in Indonesia, and the uppers were constructed in Thailand, and other parts constructed in Vietnam. The laces came from China, and they were all assembled in, I don't know, Bangladesh or someplace. And so they've had to move all around the globe to
Hmm.
just to get one pair of shoes to you. And do you
Right.
know what the total cost of all that shipping adds to the one pair of shoes? About 3 cents, about 3 pennies. But
Right.
that is about to change. And if the United States no longer guarantees the freedom of navigation on the seas, then you're not going to be able to take advantage of those economies of scale like they do now. And
Mm-hmm.
every ship is going to have security in order to transit any kind of sea, because the seas will be wide open for every buccaneer, pirate, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple of good videos. Actually, there's a good book out by Peter Zion that talks about how that will affect the world as we know it, and it's not good. So
Do you
that's
know
what
the
they're
name
trying
of
to
that?
do.
Do you know the
Yeah,
name of that book
it's
by
called "The
Peter
End of the
Zion?
World Is Just the Beginning" by Peter Zion. But you don't have to read the book. You can just go to his YouTube channel and watch some of his YouTube videos about
Okay.
Peter Zion. He's a economist and a futurist. Is a pretty interesting guy. But
I'm making sure
suffice it to
we have a list of all the books you're mentioning
yeah,
to put in the description here
I
later for
read a
folks.
lot if you haven't noticed. But suffice it to, and I think that if you're really going to understand what's going on in the world today, you have to be a student of history,
Yeah.
and you have to understand things like economics and money supply and interest rates and things like that. I was a stockbroker for 10 years. And so it was my job as a researcher to research those kinds of economic things and understand them. What does it mean when inflation goes up, or the jobless rate goes up, or what does it mean when the money supply expands, or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's cool how God has kind of used all of that experience now to help me make sense of the craziness that goes on in the world. And like I said, the long and the short of it is that there's a grand contest between the two major sides of this globe, the East and the West, for lack of a better term. And as the United States has decided to turn more inward and say, you know what, you guys, you take care of yourselves, the rest of the world. We're done getting played by that. Well, we didn't guarantee navigation on the seas out of the goodness of our hearts. It was very good for America.
Mm-hmm.
We would not have been able to build the economic superpower that we have become if it weren't for the fact that our military was ensuring freedom of navigation on the seas. And that's just one thing that we've done.
And didn't that start with Benjamin Franklin, who
Well,
started the
the
Marines?
United States Navy, yeah, the Navy, the Marines were to go after the pirates in North Africa,
Yeah.
right?
So
But
it's a long heritage and tradition,
mhm,
technically, in a way, right? That the United States has been doing this for
right,
hundreds of years,
yeah. But we have
and
seen our
and we
Navy
take it for
be
granted.
yeah, our Navy has been diminished especially since like the Obama administration. We've gotten down to the point where we don't have enough ships to do what we have always done, which is guaranteeing that freedom of navigation on the seas. But anyway, suffice it to say that along with, so we have these countries like Russia and China and Iran that we know are our enemies. We know they want to destroy us. They are doing everything they can in every realm to destroy us, even to the point of printing $100 bills that are all but indistinguishable from the real ones and flooding the market with those things. They call them super notes, and even the Secret Service has a hard time telling the difference between what the good ones and the bad ones. It's crazy.
Hmm.
uh, so with all that said, uh, there are other organizations, other countries that claim to be our allies who are also trying to destroy us. Countries like Qatar, for example, which
Right.
tries to hold itself out as this moderate Muslim country that's very reasonable and peaceful and everything, but in reality they are contributing billions of dollars a year to US universities in order to foment anti-Israel sentiment across our country. And most of the protests that we've seen on US college campuses have come straight from uh, Qatari funded organizations inside the United States.
Hmm.
That's just one example, but China has funded. They're called Confucius Institutes all across the globe that are espionage hubs for every kind of espionage, not just cultural espionage, like through TikTok and things like that, trying to rot the minds of America's youth, not just through cultural espionage by pumping fentanyl across the border into the United States, and not just cultural espionage, but industrial espionage and corporate espionage and uh, other forms of espionage military espionage that they're engaged in around the globe. We
Hmm.
see it a lot here in Panama. Of course, there's a ton of it, but we've also even seen it in places like Russia. I mean, China, anything made in China, they're finding China is making a habit of putting chips in everything from light bulbs to teapots. They put Wi-Fi sniffer chips in them that when you buy a teapot and bring it home, that thing will connect to your Wi-Fi network without your knowledge and take everything that you're doing on your internet and send it to a server in China.
Wow.
Or they're going around and putting light bulbs, selling light bulbs that have microphones in them, and they plug it in a restaurant or whatever, and there's a microphone listening to everything that's being said, and all that's being sent back to China. China is then feeding all that data into massive artificial intelligence computers, supercomputers, to try to tease out cultural, military, corporate, and industrial espionage that they can commit against the United States and our allies.
Man,
So
that's wild.
it's
And you were
everywhere.
and you're mentioning also that they're also influencing computer games when we were
Oh
talking
yeah,
here.
without a doubt. Yeah, they're making movies and video games both. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine was asked to consult on a Chinese movie. They did an action movie that was, I think, the most expensive movie ever made, and at least it's the most expensive movie ever made in China.
Hmm.
Very high production value. I watched the movie. It was actually very well done, but it is a movie about how the Chinese destroyed the Americans during the Korean War. And it's all propaganda, pure propaganda, but it shows the Americans to be these cruel monsters who are coming into peaceful villages in Korea and machine gunning civilians for no reason and raping the women and all this kind of stuff. And these heroic Chinese defenders are coming in and they're fighting the Americans and defeating them on the field of battle and stuff. It's just like, wow, that's the history that they're telling themselves. But
Hmm.
they are putting out more and more propaganda movies and videos like that, funding those things here in the United States. I myself have been contacted by Chinese companies that are making video games that are like Grand Theft Auto kind of stuff, basically training America's youth to go out and commit felonies and do violence to one another. And as they do that, they're coming to me and saying, "Hey, we'll sponsor you. We will pay you to tout these video games on your YouTube channel." And I'm like,
Mm.
"You guys obviously have not watched my YouTube channel because that's not the kind of thing I'm always speaking out against video games on my YouTube channel."
Yeah.
But they're
So,
trying to do it.
so essentially, from the research that I've done throughout the years about the communist influence, their assessment all the way back in the 40s and the 50s of the United States was that the United States is too moral of a country to defeat
Mhm.
it. And so we talk about the Cold War, and I think what a lot of people are not aware of is that the war that's being waged against the United States isn't one of military maneuvering, rockets, bullets flying. It's actually psychological espionage, right? And the degradation, essentially trying to degrade America through
Mhm.
the influence of, if it's games, if it's movies, if it's music, what have you. Um, and I imagine advertising, you name it, right? To
Mhm.
just degrade America. And I understand that that was how they viewed that they would be able to defeat America then militarily later, is if
It's a
we could
very smart
degrade them.
long-term,
Right.
strategy.
Yeah.
And they have found that Americans are very, very willing to be degraded in that way.
Hmm.
We, you know, they're able to pump so much fentanyl into the United States because we're buying it and using it.
Yeah.
They're able to get these video games into people's hands and through TikTok and rot our kids' brains because we let our kids watch TikTok and
Hmm.
we allow them to engage in that kind of activity.
Yeah.
And so, they figured out a long time ago that it's a whole lot better if you read Sun Tzu
Hmm.
to defeat your enemy without actually having to fight. And they are taking the long term approach to trying to do that to the United States. If they
Yeah.
can degrade the morals to a point where we're not in any shape to fight militarily, then they won't need to fight us militarily. And they'll be able to do things like take Taiwan, and there's not going to be much we can do about it. And
Hmm.
when you look at America today, 78% of young people do not qualify for military service, almost
Wow.
80%, 8 out of 10. And of those who do qualify, very few of them actually care to, because we've made that sort of a low class thing to do. And the previous administrations have tried to turn our military into a grand social experiment rather than a bunch of warfighters. But that's changing now,
Hmm.
thankfully, under the Trump administration. And
Yeah.
that is their long term strategy, and unfortunately, it's working.
Would you say that the statistic you just gave would have been the complete opposite in the 40s?
Yeah, no question.
Yeah.
Absolutely. About 85% of people, all the way up to the Vietnam War, were would have qualified for military service physically and mentally.
Yeah.
Uh, Today, like I'll just give you an example. My son uh, went to join the military. This is 6, 7 years ago, and there were 40 people that day that showed up to that wanted to join. So this is already a self-selected small subset of the people who would never have qualified, who aren't interested or anything. This is people who think they're qualified and are interested already.
Hmm.
But there were 40 people who showed up that day. Of those 40 people, 4 people qualified
Oh my gosh.
to join the military because only uh, 30 of them failed the initial entrance exam, the written test.
Hmm.
And of the 10 that passed it, only 4 people passed the physical. Uh, it's insane. And they're
That.
having to, I hate to say it, but I mean, they're having to take people who never would have qualified for military service, people who have a problem with cutting themselves, who have made suicide attempts. Those are not the kind of people you want to hand a gun to,
No.
but those are the people that they're getting waivers to put into the U.S. military because they can't get anybody else.
Well, I know for a fact that in our military, if you're suicidal, you're out.
Yeah, it
It's
should be.
Yeah, and we put you on suicide watch and basically out process you, um, and
Yep.
get you out because there's no way we're going to send somebody either to fight in a war or even just to do guard duty, um,
Right.
that that's suicidal because clearly they can take their life and you don't want that on your watch. Um,
Yep.
so I just can't
And
believe
that's
that they would
one
have
reason that's
somebody
not
as suicidal.
surprising that
That's
U.S. military troops are committing suicide at a rate that far exceeds the society at large.
mm,
Part of that is because the military has, well, I mean, we could, this is a whole different podcast, really, topic, but
yeah,
our
yeah,
military has uh, almost constructed an environment that would make you want to jump off a bridge.
mm,
You're taking a bunch of meat eaters, and you're not. The military is so risk averse now. You're not allowed to do anything risky. You're not allowed to, don't get yourself in any trouble. If we're going anywhere, like they're deploying to Poland, for example. My son's unit deployed to Poland as a show of force at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, and They wouldn't let them leave their little camp. They put them in squalid conditions, living in tents in the wintertime, mud everywhere. Wouldn't let them have weekends off. Can't drink a beer. Can't go, out and see the town. Nothing.
That's
And
crazy.
make you wear a mask everywhere you go all the time. I mean, all that kind of stuff. It's no wonder those guys are killing themselves. But there's a whole lot more to it. I think there's a real spiritual component to it as well. Like I said,
Sure.
that's a whole different topic for another day. But
Yeah.
suffice it to say that China is looking at that and saying, okay, there's an existing problem that the United States has. What can we do to exacerbate it? What can we
Yeah.
do to push them over the edge, to make it
Yeah.
worse and worse? And they are working together they're all doing it in different ways, but Russia, China, and Iran and North Korea are all working to try to degrade the West in that way.
And clearly, if it's affecting your military, that means that the tactics that they've been using are working.
Mhm.
And that's very troubling, right? Because that's kind of your last stand, right?
Right.
Against any external threat to the United States.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, so a lot of what you just said, I would say also parallels with Israel. It's not that extreme because we are more of a
Mhm.
conservative society, as you know.
You're much more homogenous than we are in the United
Yeah.
States. It's,
So,
it's
so it's
harder to drive a
harder.
wedge between you.
Yeah. But I'm seeing those same influences, the exact same campaigns is how you see it, because the
Mhm.
campaigns are the same, the style, the font, the coloring of the posters and whatnots, and
Yeah.
it's just so obvious if you're paying attention. You don't have to be a
What's
rocket
crazy, I
scientist,
think, what I see is that
you know.
these Israelis that are being recruited by the Iranian, IRGC to commit acts of espionage or sabotage inside Israel. What in the world?
Yeah,
I mean, how that blows my mind. But there you go.
yeah. Well, those are from what I understand, those are they come from the Soviet, the former Soviet Union bloc, right? Like
Mm,
Cherkessians or something. I forget exactly which
mhm,
people group, but basically they're not. If I understand correctly, they're not even Jewish. They made it into Israel as part of the Jewish aliyah from these countries,
mhm,
and basically don't have any family connection, so to speak, to the bigger family of Israel, like most Israelis are. If you're Ethiopian, if you're Asian or European Jews, what have you, Middle Eastern Jews, at the end of the day, we're all Jews and we're a big family.
mhm.
They don't have that same connection and yeah, patriotism, I guess you could say.
Right.
So I think they target these folks because and or planted them ahead of time, actually, and help them falsify documentation, what have you, to get in here, because it's not easy either.
And
I can
offer
tell
them
you,
money,
offer them money, and
yeah.
yeah, exactly. So lots of different angles that because I know we're investigating it, and so it's just I'm just saying what I've heard,
Mhm.
um, you know, but it's definitely something that a lot of Israelis are very ticked about, of course, and are saying they
As
need to
well
be
they should be.
deported. And yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's treason, and the punishment should be very high for that, in my opinion.
Mhm.
Um, so you've been corresponding in all these crazy places, and right now, um, well, I guess before we transition to, I want to talk about Syria, but before we do that, we had a conversation about the Russia Ukraine war, and you were just explaining to me how things broke down with the American and Ukrainian
Mhm.
talks, right?
Mhm.
And trying to basically get them to a peace deal with Russia and all that. And as you know, as everybody who watched and saw that embarrassing moment with the American president and vice president and Zelensky, all of them acting, in my opinion, very poorly. I
Mhm.
don't think any of them really I mean, this is just my personal opinion. None of them really showed any real diplomacy in that
Mhm.
conversation. They all
Mhm.
kind of charged everything up. It's like one guy said, and it all just kind of But
Yeah.
could you kind of break that down? Why America's treating Ukraine in that way? Why Americans
Okay.
view that they shouldn't, support the war with Ukraine? And
Yeah. So I mean, so first of all, like I said, going along with all of this espionage that's been committed by Russia, they have done everything they can to convince, especially American conservatives, that Ukraine is the bad guy, that Zelensky is corrupt, that there's bioweapons labs in Ukraine and all this stuff. Which I, when I was there, I spent more than 6 months in Ukraine covering the war, and I tried to track those things down. I tried
Mhm.
to, do deep investigative reporting on the bioweapons labs and on whether or not Zelensky was corrupt and is he buying yachts and stuff all over the world. Which what I found is that there's none of that is true.
Mhm.
And it's just, I mean, look, I'm a conservative and I voted for President Trump, and I'm glad President Trump is our president. But if he's wrong, I still ought to have the freedom to be able to say, no, he's wrong about that.
Right.
And as a guy who was there that really did a lot of work to track down the truth about this stuff, I can tell you that much of what we're hearing out of the political right in the United States is coming straight from Russian propaganda. It can be traced back. I have a friend who is a computer programmer that helped to program they came up with a program that can look at social media. If you see a meme or something going around on social media, and can track it back to the very first place that it ever appeared.
Mhm.
And those places are almost always coming from Russian bots and server farms inside Russia. Uh, and so they are not organic. They are not grassroots. They're not people. What I'm saying is that people are being told what to believe, and there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of fake accounts across X and Facebook and Instagram that are posting this stuff. And so when it gets put out on like 4chan, some claim that, well, Zelensky bought a Lamborghini the other day or whatever.
Yeah.
That claim shows up on 4chan, and it immediately, like within milliseconds, will get spread across thousands of fake profiles all
Mhm.
across the internet. And so it's like, yeah, it wouldn't even be humanly possible for people to read that and go, oh, I agree, and retweet it. No, it happens in like milliseconds, just a boom, 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 boom. And so, and then that stuff ends up in the public discourse. And
Right.
then people like me have to go track it down and go, wait, is this true? And then we go find out, no, it's not true. It's
And
propaganda.
and people like me who are from the conservative right are going to look at those and go, "Oh yeah, these guys are bad." And like the
Mhm.
discussion that we had before this interview, and how you
Right.
set me straight on a lot of these things, because
Well, and
I,
look,
I,
you
because
have
I
to
was
say,
trying to understand what was happening, right? I mean,
yeah,
because
Zelensky and the Ukrainians have been not helping the matter at all, just
right,
because they don't understand American politics, and
right,
they see America as one unit. But America, as I said, is two different countries that live in the same place. And
yeah,
so he's been figuring out how to deal with Joe Biden for 4 years or three
mhm,
years.
yeah,
And look, some of his closest advisors have told me that Zelensky really did not like Joe Biden at all. But he was like, I got to play the game with these guys, and so he was kind of going along with the whole globalist thing, and like, yeah. Uh, and then President Trump gets in, and he comes and tries to deal with Trump the same way he dealt with Biden, and that just ain't going to happen. It just doesn't work like that. And
yeah,
I'm saying, like, he needs somebody to sit him down and explain to him, okay, you're dealing with a different country now. And
right,
you need to understand that you can't approach them the way that you approached the last administration. Now, he gets a real bad rap for things that he has done. For example, look, Zelensky, I don't care. You can like him or hate him. That's fine.
yeah,
The people that matter are the people who voted for him, are the people
correct,
that he's leading in Ukraine.
correct.
And he's got a higher approval rating than President Trump does, and
Wow,
and always has. His approval rating at the beginning of the war was 91%. So
wow,
I mean, the Ukrainian people sure liked him. Okay, well, at the beginning of the war, I was there in Kiev, and Zelensky came out, and he was wearing that signature jumpsuit thing that he wears,
Mm-hmm.
and and that's actually like the military garrison uniform. Okay, it's like
Mm-hmm.
when you're in garrison and you don't have to do anything. That's their military uniform. And he came out and he said, "Look, I am not going to be jetting around the world, whining and dining, wearing fancy suits and everything, while I've got people fighting and dying in the field." It reminds me of Uriah the Hittite when he came back. And King David brought him back and like, "Hey, Bathsheba's knocked up. Hey, you should go hang out with your wife a little bit. Go ahead, go ahead." And
Yeah.
Uriah the Hittite went and slept on his porch.
Yeah.
And
Right.
David's like, "What the heck?" And he's like, "Sir, my king, far be it from me to enjoy the fruits of my home when my men are fighting and dying on the field." I
Yeah.
mean, because he was an honorable man, right? Well,
Right.
Zelensky took a page out of that story from Second Samuel and
Mm-hmm.
said, "I am not going to wear a suit as long as I've got people in the field fighting and dying. And I don't care if the world thinks I'm an idiot for it. This
Yeah.
is my sign of solidarity for my people." Now, that's well known. That's well known.
Right.
And it would take literally 12 seconds of a Google search to find that out if you didn't know that, if you wondered why Zelensky wears a jumpsuit everywhere he goes.
So why did the
But
reporter ask him that question and kind of
because that reporter's a
threw him under the
moron, I
bus?
know that guy, first of all. And okay, that guy from OAN,
Yeah.
um, it's not so much OAN is not so much a journalistic network as it is a mouthpiece for the MAGA movement,
Yeah.
which I think "Make America Great Again" is a fantastic thing. I think that's great,
Yeah.
but it is being pushed to the point of being a cult of personality. When you get to the
Right.
point where where President Trump comes out and says, "We lost 38,000 men building the Panama Canal." And I go, excuse me, there were 350 Americans that died building the Panama Canal. The United States did not lose 38,000 men die. That's not a matter of opinion. That's a well-known fact. And
Right.
I just point that out. No, he was wrong about that. And I get people threatening my life, telling me they hope my kids get cancer,
Oh my
telling me,
Lord.
"Keep his name out of your dirty mouth." But like, I'm not allowed to point out if one of
Yeah.
our political leaders says something incorrect, then that's a problem. And
That is a problem.
I'm not gonna be a part of that religion. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I support President Trump in most of the things he's doing around the globe. But if he says something or does something that's wrong, I'm going to call it out as wrong. We need to be men of integrity who
Yeah.
will stand up for the truth, even if it goes against our own political tribe.
Right.
And
Because it's
and so
checks and balances. It's just like
right,
when I say
right.
something wrong and somebody corrects me online, even if I don't know them from Adam, and I go and examine my statement and go, "Oh, oops, you're right." And I tell them, I said, "Hey, thanks for calling me out on that.
Mhm.
There's nothing
And
wrong for
that's
being
what a good leader
corrected."
would do. That's what a good leader would do. What scares me about President Trump is that he either doesn't have anybody who can say, "Mr. President, that was incorrect. You were wrong about that," or uh, he won't allow anybody around him either he doesn't have anybody who knows the truth, which would be very scary, or
Right.
he does have people who know the truth, but they're too afraid to tell him. That'd be even more scary. But suffice it to say, we as journalists, whether or not whatever my personal political party is or tribe, I've got to stand up for what's true. And so
Right.
when it comes to Ukraine, um, look, there's plenty of corruption in Ukraine, no question. As a matter of fact, Vladimir Zelensky was elected as a Trump-like figure to get rid of uh, of the
Corruption. Yeah.
corruption
Yeah.
in the Ukraine. And he's done a lot of getting rid of that by jailing oligarchs and firing tons of people in the government. He fired every military recruiter at one point because he found out that some guys were able to pay military recruiters to classify them as non-deployable so they wouldn't have to go to war. And he
Hmm.
fired every single military recruiter and replaced all of them. So, I
Hmm.
mean, you got to respect a guy that does that. Now,
Sure. What about the
however,
forced recruitments, though? Because that's something that people are drawing attention to with what is negatively happening in
Yeah,
Ukraine. And I know
very good question.
Vance raised that as well.
Yeah. Okay, so very good question. They do have a military draft in in Ukraine. Do they have a military draft in Israel?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I mean
mandatory.
it's mandatory, right? So
Yeah,
what do you do to somebody who says, "Screw that, I'm not joining," and they just go AWOL?
they go
You
to
go
jail.
and you grab them and you put them in jail, right?
Correct, correct.
Well,
So that's what we're seeing.
Ukraine is under existential threat.
Yeah,
And they're not under general mobilization at all. Actually, I was in Ukraine in December, and there are still plenty of military age males working in the restaurants and walking around town, and they're not running and hiding or anything like that. But if they have received the draft notice and they have ignored it and have not reported to the the center to be processed into the military, then
yeah,
yeah, if they catch them, they're going to put them, they're going to throw them in a van and they're going to take them and force them to go. And that's
right,
because the country is under existential threat. If they don't get people into the military, the country will cease to exist. So I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. I would expect the United States to do the exact same thing,
right.
and we did the last time we had a draft during the Vietnam War. If people were dodging the draft, they had to flee to Canada or Mexico or someplace. So I don't understand why that's such a bad thing. You know, I
Yeah,
mean, yeah, it's kind of shocking when you see them grab a guy and throw him in the back of a van. However, I have to say that a couple of those videos I've been able to track down, and they were from like 7 years ago before the war even started, and it was like just some guy that was a criminal that got grabbed and thrown into a van
right.
by the, and they're resurrecting those videos and then pretending that those are
So
violent.
so that's the Russian propaganda in effect, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's like,
Ab-
again, it's targeting people like me from the conservative right. I'm going to
mhm,
see that video. I'm going to have compassion for this guy who says
mhm.
his kid's at home alone or his dog, is left behind,
Yeah.
whatever. And cuz you're like, "Hey man, that's not cool, right?" But again, it's cuz it's void of context, you know,
Right.
and or
Right.
false information, a video
Right.
from years ago, whatever,
Mhm.
like you pointed out. And I just think that's really interesting that, you've been able to track that down. Again, this is not my world. It's not my area of,
There are some very good
expertise.
resources that will
So,
help you do that. I mean, that you can go to Bellingcat is one great open source journalism project that has been able to track down a bunch of that stuff.
mm,
Some of those videos that came out of Ukrainian soldiers burning President Trump in effigy, they
yeah, what
tracked
was
those
that
down
all
and
about?
they tracked those down and figured out those were Russian soldiers dressed in Ukrainian uniforms that made that video, and they could tell because of the
Wow.
slang that they used in Russian, trying to speak Ukrainian, but they didn't speak it just right because the Ukrainian and
Right.
Russian are not quite exactly the same. So
Correct.
stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I think all of it we have to take with a healthy dose of skepticism, and it's okay
Right.
to be against spending America's money because we're out of money. I mean, we're everything we spend is going on a Chinese credit card right now. So I
Hmm.
understand you're like, hey, we've given enough money to the rest of the world. Let's try to get our own house in order for once. I get that. That's cool. That's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also understand that there are forces at work out there that are directly targeting your opinion and trying to change it to something based on false information.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really, I'm glad that you brought some clarity on that because, like I said, people like me that are not looking
Hmm.
to hate on the Ukrainians
Yeah.
or are easily fooled. And I find myself getting fooled and having to talk to people like you to try to bring clarity to this because I'm like,
Mm-mm.
what the heck's going on here? Um,
Right.
so
Right.
talking about clarity and what's going on, what can you talk about what's happening with the regime that's taken over in Syria? There are claims that this is Israel has involved. This is what I've heard. Israel has involved in getting these monsters into power. That this is another creation of the Israeli Mossad, and how dare an Israeli like me, speak against these guys when it's my government that created this and all this stuff.
Well,
And you know,
that's hogwash. I mean, there's no question. I've been following this, and I've been to Syria many times.
yeah,
I've been following this for a long time. HTS is a creation of the Turks, and the Turks are no friend to Israel.
yep.
To try to make the case that Israel is the one who created HTS is just plain. It's just bunk. It's ridiculous. These guys are, you have to understand the Shia Sunni divide.
Yep.
The reason why HTS and that brand of extremism, which comes out of Turkey and out of places like uh, Saudi Arabia, believe it or not, that
Mm.
Sunni uh, axis
Mhm.
against the Iranian Hezbollah Hamas Shiite axis, which the Alawites and everybody's freaking out like, oh, the Alawites are getting murdered, and I've seen stuff on social media of like little dirty children, please help the Alawites, and then if you just know a little bit about the history of Syria, the Alawites were in power for about 70 years, and they were every bit as brutal to the Sunni majority as the Sunni majority is being to them now. So this is kind of a tit for tat thing.
So
I'm
it's a
not
payback. It's a
justifying
payback.
it.
Yeah.
It's a payback, but I'm not
Yeah.
justifying it in any way.
No.
Civilians and innocents should never be killed or tortured or made to suffer because of something that their leadership has done. But if they are being made to suffer because their leadership committed acts of terror against others, then the culpability lies at the feet of their own leadership, not of the other party, or at least partially of
Right.
their own leadership. So what I
Yeah.
mean is, like, you can't make that same argument in the war between Israel and Hamas, because Israel was not attacking anybody. Israel, there was a ceasefire on October 6th,
Right.
and Hamas came and did what they did, those terrible atrocities on October 7th. And then everything that happens after that, all of the suffering, all of the death that happens inside Gaza, is the culpability for that is laid right at the feet of Hamas, because
Yeah.
Hamas is the one that that set fire to this conflict.
Hmm.
But in the case of Syria, you have the Alawites under Bashar al-Assad going back years, just absolutely brutalizing the rest of the country. And now the rest of the country is taken over, and they're getting back at the Alawites. But they're also fighting, just in the last couple of days, specifically fighting against the Lebanese military. The HTS is Syria is going to war against Lebanon and
Hmm.
fighting against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah, of course, is Shiite led terror organization, so they're going to side with the Alawites, and they historically have. So that's the problem. Now, I think the real exciting thing for Israel
Hmm.
is that the Israel is partnering with the Druze, who
Hmm.
are moderate and would love nothing more than to be part of Israel, because they know that their Druze brothers in Israel live a lot better than they do in Syria. So by opening their arms to the Druze, I think the Israelis are making a very good move to create that safe buffer zone across the
Hmm.
border inside Syria that will make Israelis safer for many years to come.
And in essence, that actually also is a debunk of these people that I'm running into online with these weird, Israel cabal, stupid junk. Um, if Israel had involvement in dethroning Bashar al-Assad, and they wanted to get this Julani guy, who's to my understanding, he's ISIS, Al
Mm-hmm,
Qaeda
mm-hmm,
scumbag,
mm-hmm,
the worst of the worst. In fact, the same terrorist that helped train the Nukhba terrorists in
mm-hmm,
Afghanistan, what have you, and have brought back those tactics, techniques of brutality, which they're carrying out against uh, uh, um, the Syrians, um, and those that were, like you were saying, were being brutal before, but now they're making a comeback, but they're being led by the worst of the worst. Is that
Right.
a correct assessment?
Yeah, I mean, you take a jihadi and put a suit on him, he's still going to be a jihadi. I mean, that if we understand this to be
Yeah,
a ideological, I mean, you know, your worldview affects everything else.
yeah,
Real, everything's downstream of your religion, your worldview, the way you see the most fundamental aspects of life.
yeah,
And those guys' worldview has not changed one bit, not at
hmm,
all.
yeah,
So they might see it as politically expedient now to put on a suit and act like they're, ready to be progressive and join the West. But I've been in close contact with those guys in Syria, and they are not good people.
and Israel is so, and it is correct that Israel is actually doing the very opposite, because I know like the Shaldag guys that went up and took over the Syrian Mount
Underground
Hermon.
thing is,
Yeah,
oh, okay, yeah,
yeah, the Mount Hermon maneuver, right?
gotcha, gotcha.
So Israel has the highest peak in the country. It's Mount Hermon. For
Hmm.
anybody who's been to the country, what most people don't know is that the higher peak is on the Syrian side. And so
Hmm.
what Israel did is we sent one of our elite units, plus the Mountaineer unit, etc., and many other units. We sent paratroopers, you name it, to go take over their peak, to create a buffer zone. And like you said, and also within that buffer zone, they have the Druze community that are Syrian. So
Hmm.
why would they do that? Is what I was trying to debate these people online and say, why would Israel go ahead and do this? Make military advancements before Giuliani took over, because they saw
Hmm.
who was taking over. Why would they do airstrikes against military installations, munitions factories, etc.? And why would they carry out a mission all the way back in September? And that's the one I think you thought I was
Right.
talking about, with the Shaldag guys
Yeah.
going deep into Syria. Why
Into
would they make,
Syria.
yeah, make all these dangerous maneuvers? What? Because they support these guys? I mean, I'm just, it's like people
Right.
are like
They trust them as far
themselves.
as they can throw them.
But
You
you know what I
know?
mean? It's like people are contradicting themselves, right? You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah,
you can't say that, but then just look at the facts of what Israel's done. Like that's insane. Why would I support?
of
you know,
course.
and so I just, to me, that's just amazing how Israel's also been able to preemptively make all these maneuvers ahead of time, defending ourselves before these guys. And more than that too, we actually probably saved the lives of tens of thousands of Syrians who are being butchered right now, if
Hmm.
those terrorists had those munitions, because they
Hmm.
probably would have taken it out first on those guys.
Yeah, Syrians and Israelis, without a doubt, they're definitely making the world a safer place. Taking that kind of, I mean, anytime there's weapons like that in a failed state, those weapons are durable and fungible. Somebody's going to get a hold of them, and they're going to either use them or sell them. Either way is bad. And so the best thing that Israel could do would be to just make them have a unscheduled, spontaneous disassembly, accidentally go up in smoke, and then no, we don't have to worry about them anymore.
Yeah, and that would be really bad.
Hmm.
So, Chuck, thank you so much for this conversation, brother. This has been
Yeah,
really
man.
good. If there's something I'm missing, go ahead and pitch it in here. Uh,
Well, let's get together again sometime because we obviously we have lots of great stuff to talk about.
Absolutely, brother. Well, thank you so much. I'll make sure to get the social media links to you so people can follow you. Um, I personally can highly recommend Chuck, because I've seen his information that he puts out that is very unique, very rare. It's grounded, it's down to earth. It's not this conspiracy theory nonsense stuff. We've had other conversations about other things that just really opened my eye to a lot of different areas that I've been ignorant about. And I just want to thank you, Chuck, for this relationship. Thank you
Sure.
for what you're doing, literally risking your life to get the information out there for people, the truth out there for people. Uh, People have no clue what you do in order to get them that information, which I have a little of insight into what you do. And I'm personally hugely appreciated for your sacrifice and the
Well,
work that you're
I'm
doing.
still waiting for you to sneak me into Gaza on one of your missions. So let's
Hey,
go.
we're not talking about stuff like this online. But if the Israeli authorities are listening, then yes, these are one of the people that we want to get into Gaza and get them to the front lines of where the IDF is fighting, and give you a front row seat to the truth behind the war in Gaza and or in Judea, Samaria, and or in Lebanon, and or in Syria, and you can get reliable information from Chuck. So to the Israeli government, to the Ministry of what is
Public
it? The
affairs.
Public Affairs. Guys, open your eyes and start letting people like Chuck in. And there's a few other people that I have on my list that I personally petitioned. They're reliable sources of information that will tell the truth. Guys, if you like this episode, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you share this information, because otherwise it's not going to get to other people. And make sure that you support the channel. Make sure you support what Chuck is doing. Like I said, it's going to all be in the description of this video. Thank you for listening. And guys, shalom from the land of Israel. All right, brother.